Welcome to Supply Chain Now, the voice of global supply chain. Supply Chain Now focuses on the best in the business for our worldwide audience, the people, the technologies, the best practices, and today's critical issues, the challenges and opportunities. Stay tuned to hear from those making global business happen right here on Supply Chain Now.
I'm Ward Richmond. I'm with Colliers International. Welcome to the last session of this amazing week here in Charleston at our Logistics and Transportation Solutions Conference, the L&T Group, led by Jack Rosenberg. Such an amazing week it's been, and pleased to be here with my podcast partner in crime, Scott Luton, with Supply Chain Now. And we'll be co-hosting this live podcast today with our special guest, Jeremy Giles with Constellation Real Estate Partners, and my colleague, Bret Swango with Colliers International. So we're ready to kick it off and turn it on over to Scott.
Yeah, you already did all the heavy lifting.
Yeah,
so you introduced, we're at the 2022 Supply Chain Conference, the best one yet, I hear, hosted by the Dewberry, which is a five-star resort. How nice is this hotel?
Oh, very nice. Love it. Yeah. I got a late checkout today, actually, because I'm doing the podcast. My flight doesn't leave till 3, so they're giving me a 2 p.m. checkout. I'm just going to, hang out and enjoy Charleston for a little longer.
Well, some of y'all, I think all of y'all know Ward, but what you may not know is he is a gifted rock and roll star. And I asked him to bring his musical equipment here today. He did not oblige me, so maybe next time. But we're in this beautiful backdrop city of Charleston, South Carolina. I happen to be from Aiken, South Carolina, so it was an annual rite of passage to come down here. I want to start by asking each of y'all one of your favorite aspects of visiting Charleston. So I'm going to start with Bret first. So Bret.
We were promised hospitality when we showed up, and I've been blown away by just, they said this the best manners of any city in the country, and based on, a sample size of 3 days, I got to agree with that. So I've been blown away by the experience.
I'm with you. Jeremy?
Well, I hate to go second because I'll reiterate what Bret said, the people. It's just, great culture, great people. Food and drink's been really good as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to put you on the spot then. Name your best single food item you've had since you've been in town.
Ooh, that's hard.
It was National Shrimp Day just a couple days ago.
It was the shrimp. That's why the shrimp tasted so good a couple days ago.
They have a parade around here for that each year, I think. Yeah. Okay, Ward, favorite part about Charleston?
I just love the overall vibe of the city. So the architecture and just how it keeps this old school, small town feel, but super vibrant and so unique. This is my second time here. The first time was also for an L&T conference a few years ago. And this morning I hit up Charleston Power Yoga, so I got to give them out a shout out. And I went the last time I was here, so I've been on their email list. They've been reminding me for about 3 years, and so I came back and did it this morning at 6 a.m. to, get mentally prepped for our session today.
Lots of plugs.
Yeah.
So much to like about Charleston. I got to add one more in. I'd never been to the top of this space here, right? Rooftop of the Dewberry. And that view of Charleston, 360 degrees, is gorgeous. So if you haven't done that, check that out.
I haven't done it yet. I'm going to have to go do it after this.
Yeah. Today. Okay, but all of that aside, and by the way, Charleston is a growing supply chain hub and mecca in many different ways. The port here in Charleston has experienced record growth, and that's creating opportunities regionally, which is great, especially when you combine that with what's going on in Savannah and Jacksonville and other parts of the East Coast. So that's really cool to see. That is our segue to getting to the heavy lifting, right? We've got two incredible guests here today. So where are we starting with Jeremy and Bret?
Okay, well, let's just start with some introductions from our two guests over here. So we'll start with Jeremy Giles. Jeremy is a fellow Dallasite, like me, living in Dallas, Texas. And Jeremy, you want to tell a little bit about your background and what you're doing now and how you started your brand new company 1 year ago, and tell us all about what's going on with you.
Yeah, so I spent about 20 years at Prologis. But last year, I launched Constellation Real Estate Partners with Henley of J.P. Morgan. We launched last June, and it's probably not a unique story. It's a two-pronged investment thesis. So you've heard a lot about these themes the last couple of days. One was we wanted to be in the Sun Belt because that's where we were seeing population growth. And COVID has been such an accelerant of change. So trends that we were seeing already were accelerated. And we saw a lot of demand around that. So that was thesis 1A. Thesis 1B was, I've never seen this amount of supply chain change in my career. So being in places where we could take advantage of that, Charleston's certainly part of that. We closed on land in El Paso a couple of weeks ago. So the conversations the last couple of days about nearshoring have been near and dear to my heart.
Right.
Yeah.
And, the other reason we started is clearly there weren't nearly enough industrial developers with that strategy. But kidding aside, we set out to differentiate ourselves in a pretty crowded space, and I think we do it in 4 ways. Number one is sort of old school real estate. I remember interviewing someone really early on, was doing a lot of deals, and we said, well, how are you doing all these deals through COVID? And as we talked to him, what we found is he was doing a lot of it via Google Earth. Well, the reality is, old school real estate is relationships, it's people in the room, it's a lot of shoe leather, and that experience was really important. Even though we're a new company, collectively we've developed about 90 million square feet. We've invested about $24 billion collectively. Leased a lot of space over the years. You get a lot of those pieces. The second thing is...
Hey, Jeremy, really quick. I think one of the things you mentioned, how COVID has accelerated so many different things, and we've had so many powerful lessons learned, that value of relationships. As one of our guests had said, you can't start a relationship easily in the middle of a pandemic. So folks that are preset to building those relationships have really been ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
So a big part of your business, it sounds.
Absolutely. Second thing is our use of data science. That's really important to us. Through our investment group, we've got 3 data scientists. We lean on them both to validate our investments and to source deals. So there's kind of a mixture of old school and new school real estate.
They in-house or third party?
They're in-house.
That's cool.
Yeah. And the other thing that we do is we roll up our sleeves and we fix problems. There are no easy land sites left. So if you look at our deal flow, if you look at our deal pipeline, we've got utility challenges, we've got environmental, we've got entitlements. And so we've set out to fix problems, and that's how we unlock value. And the fourth thing is a little squishy for a group like this, but we think empathy is really important. And Hin, who came from J.P. Morgan, had a vision for what he thought a GP entity should look like as an LP investor. So we built for a heavy co-invest because we wanted to align interests with our investment partners. We built the accounting and the capital markets structure so we could be very institutional right away. And for me, the empathy was understanding what an occupier wants after spending 20 years working with them. I like to think we're site plan snobs. And I think
that's a scientific term.
Absolutely.
We talked a lot about that last night, too, and hopefully we can dig into some more details there.
And empathy for broker partners. I mean, brokers are so important in this environment, and I feel like every time I'm talking to one, I'm giving them the airline speech. We know you have a choice when you fly, but how often do brokers get the, hey, do you know any talent and do you know any land that I can buy? And their time and their reputation are their most important assets, and we try to be really respectful of both those things.
We appreciate that.
Definitely. So we're ahead of schedule. Man, it's fishing crew here.
We're moving. We're logistics experts here.
That's right. So Bret, same question. Tell us about yourself.
Anybody that knows me well knows that we can throw that off quickly. So Bret Swango, I've been at Colliers about 7 years now. I started my career out in the insurance industry. Which if you think about it, that's kind of the original big data industry, right? So I started out at Allstate, and one of the things that we kind of prided ourselves on there is that despite we having an antiquated model, right? We're competing with the esurances of the world selling over the internet. We were selling through agents. But our competitive advantage is 80 years of historical data and taking those same type of analytics that went into our product. Because if you think about insurance, really, your product's just a promise. And given, I think 80% of the buying decision is based on price. So you hope that if you're better at pricing the risk than the guy next to you, if that person's not going to get in a wreck for a long time, hopefully you're cheaper, they pick you, they're a really valuable customer. Hopefully if you're, they're going to get in a wreck tomorrow, hopefully you're more expensive, they go with the other guy. So it's kind of made the best mathematician win. And Allstate took a lot of those analytics and applied them to other elements of the business, right? How they staff their contact centers, how they compensated agents. And so that background probably set me up well. And the most similar thing to what I'm doing now is agency deployment, right? So you could put one more agent anywhere in the country. Where would you put that agent? And it wasn't just about where is demand, it's where's the existing supply, both internally and externally. So coming over to Colliers in 2015, I can still remember where I was sitting at my desk when I was working with a great team in Chicago who had some really large accounts, and I'm listening to how these guys are, making this business decision. I'm like, wow, I don't know way more than I know, but I think there's a way to do this a lot better. And then the other piece that was really attractive to me coming into the industry was seeing that I think you could argue now the market swung the other way, where land is the scarce element in the value equation, but for the whole rest of my career, it was the tenant, right? So saying, how do we help the tenant make better business decisions? And it really, we were pitching a large life science firm in 2018, and they're like, we just put, really strategic head of real estate. He said, we just put $300 million into our HQ. But he's like, transparently, he's like, I don't know if the talent that we need to go or to get where we're going as an organization is located in this market. I'm like, all right, got the business problem. Now let's go find some data to address it, and then let's apply some analytics and technology to that data. Currently leading the workforce analytics piece, which, that obviously was a pretty hot topic in our current environment, and they call it also location intelligence. All I'm trying to do, Jeremy, I love your point on, you talked about your partner and how you guys crafted your organization around what that partner's needs were. So that client-first approach of what business problem is the client trying to solve, and then how do we bring data to that business decision to enable what we call quantitatively defensible decisions, which I think that's going to become increasingly important as we, kind of battle some of the volatility and the rate of change in our current environment.
Hey, I was going to chime in and just say, Jeremy, we live in Dallas. We have that in common. You know what else we have in common?
What's that?
Both of our companies have an incredible data scientist on board. Yeah. Bret Swango right here. Oh. And I mean that, and having someone like Bret here to help support our occupier clients and also the developer clients as well to go analyze these things is invaluable. And just listening, I mean, when you're listening to Bret talk over here, I'm like, I never thought of you as a data scientist until I heard this term today, but you surely are one.
He's a perfect expert. I've never thought about, as you said, Bret, insurance being the leading industry that was well ahead of the curve when it came to the usage of analytics. It makes perfect sense. I never stopped to think about that. So on that as a segue, I want to talk more about analytics and how you see analytics transforming the decision-making process for users, investors, you name it. Give us some more.
Yeah, well, I think I kind of teased this, but I think anytime you're in an environment where there's an increasing, I guess I'll just ask the room, who thinks that the market raise your hand if you think the market's moving slower or changing slower than it was 5 or 10 years ago.
So for our listeners, no one raised their hand. Okay, Bret.
So the thought process there being as things change faster, the criticality of having really good information. I mean, what do we hear from the developers? In addition to saying, hey, labor is most important, they were saying, hey, we really need you guys to educate your clients, right? Because the market's moving so fast. So managing expectations, because if you haven't done a lease renewal, even in 3 years, you're up for a rude awakening, right? So what they're kind of saying is, hey, the criticality of ensuring that other party is really well informed is hypercritical. So I think that analytics is going to, again, given my background, where I probably lean on these things, but I think there's no other industry with this amount of capital being allocated to it, just less kind of analytics in play that are supporting some of these 9-figure business decisions. So I think when we look out, I say 5 years, I frankly think even 3, the increased need for that quantitatively defensible decision. And really, frankly, it's a little bit of a CBA, to use another technical term, of saying, hey, here's what the data's telling us, and we might be wrong, but we're using best-in-class information with the best-in-class methodology, and because of that, here's the decision that we're making. And I think it's really hard to get fired under those circumstances versus saying, hey, I really like this because, we say it's hunches and headlines.
Hey, and let me say one more thing. Another thing going on, like Jeremy's core values that you discussed, like the marriage between the analytics and the old school real estate. Because so when we're talking about these analytics and like what you want in a building or something, you can go put it in all the computers you want. But at the end of the day, we're out there with tenants looking at these buildings, and I know like what's important is not how the office space looks, it's how many trailer parks there are, how many car parks there are, what's the ingress, egress. And so when I'm talking to the occupiers, I want to know, I've talked to long-haul truck drivers about ingress, egress, like, is this going to work for you? Because when you go in and look at it with maybe a real estate executive at a large corporation, it might look fine, but you bring a truck driver in, and we like to go try to get our clients out there driving a truck in and out of the truck court and see how that is. And like sometimes you have to have the human touch combined with the analytics to really succeed, and that's the secret weapon.
You cut me off. Or no, you didn't cut me off. That was a great point, Ward. I'm mad at myself for not making that point sooner. Because I think we get
that's because you're the data scientist and I'm the real estate broker.
Totally.
So it's cool. We're just doing what we do.
100%. So many people sit there and like, oh, you can do all this analysis you want. It's like, no. The only time I make I try to not make a recommendation unless it's here's what the data is really. It's either giving you a thesis that you're generating with the data, or you're talking to a broker and they're giving, all this stuff. It wasn't like there's a playbook for this. It's what business problem are you trying to solve? Okay, well, let me go see if I can get some data to validate that. You bring it back to the broker. Is this consistent with what you're seeing on the ground? And when those things line up, that's like, okay, this is probably a good decision.
I love that. Jeremy.
To your point, Brett, I was talking to our head of capital markets the other day, and she said, we're at a capital markets crossroads. And I said, you're right, but we're also at like 14 other crossroads at the same time. And
well said.
To your point on pace of change, think about all the variables that are moving around in the debt and equity markets, in the geopolitical world, and the supply chain, all these things happening at once. It's never been harder to underwrite a deal from any side. And back to the old school and new school, the two things I want are as much data as I can get, quality data, not just data.
Right.
And trusted relationships is sort of the old school.
Yeah, man.
What you want when you're in choppy waters is someone you've dealt with before and they're going to do the right thing.
So I think a key, and we hear this through a lot of our conversations at Supply Chain Now, is here in 2022, for years now, we've had more data at our fingertips, whether you're consumers or you're leaders or you're a data scientist. We've had more data at our fingertips. But to your point, and some things you spoke to, you got to be looking, you got to find the right data, the signals, instead of the tidal wave of noise that we're all hit with every day. So I want to keep going because we're going to have to book y'all for a data science podcast soon. But Ward, we want to talk to Jeremy about COVID-19 and its impact of the future of supply chain. It's impacting now, clearly, but the future, right?
And I would say, COVID went down 2 years ago. Actually, the last time I saw Scott in person, we did a podcast like the week before quarantine, and I was in Atlanta, and so it's good to see you again, my friend, in real life, because we've done a lot of virtual podcasts since then. But 2 years ago, and then obviously COVID happened, everything that happened because of that. Now we also have all of this geopolitical stuff going on, which we might want to also tag onto that and how what you're seeing. But we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think we talked about it earlier, but I think COVID-19 to me was really an accelerant of things that we were already seeing. I remember meeting with some customers in Europe pre-COVID. And we had them, and it was a great meeting. Towards the end, I said, okay, what are your 3 biggest problems? And they looked at me like I was the least intelligent person they'd ever met. And one of them said, you don't know? And I said, well, enlighten me. Well, the 3 biggest problems are labor, and labor. Yeah. And that was pre-COVID. And look, the demographics of the largest economies in the world, U.S., Europe, China, and Japan, are not going to change overnight. I think economists say it takes 20 years to make a 20-year-old. And the labor problem's not going away anytime soon, and COVID accelerated that problem. We already saw e-com going through the roof, and obviously when we were all sitting around, and I remember being in my home office, officing with a golden retriever.
What was the golden retriever's name?
Cooper.
Cooper.
And Cooper barked every time Amazon showed up, which was about 15 times a day. But that was accelerated. And it broadened, maybe that's eased a little in the last couple of months, but it broadened the base of people that were doing it, and that has tremendous implications to logistics, real estate. The third thing was you already saw people adjusting their supply chain pre-COVID. You saw Foxconn already starting to think about how they would diversify not out of China, but in addition to China, and COVID.
China plus one.
China plus one. COVID illustrated some of the weaknesses or that existed prior. So those three things are kind of what I saw accelerated.
So really quick, before you move on, I think I remember to your point about acceleration, because I think that's going to be a major theme of our chat here today. I heard Walmart's Chief Customer Experience Officer share this little nugget at a virtual event about halfway through the pandemic, that Walmart as an enterprise had experienced 5 years of digital transformation in 5 weeks' time. And just imagine if Walmart, with all of their resources, imagine all those other companies that don't have nearly the army of data scientists and supply chain pros are experiencing that same level of acceleration. It's remarkable to serve the consumer in this environment. You were going to ask a follow-up before we move on? Maybe not?
Well, we mentioned this a little bit, and just because this is a podcast and people that might be listening to this weren't here yesterday to hear our head of supply chain with Colliers, Brewster Smith, talk about this, but that's the reshoring. And you mentioned that earlier, but I think there's two things. There's the inventory that we want to keep on hand, like domestically people want to up inventories over here, so that's going to be one thing going on because of all of these supply chain constraints. China has been shutting down again because of COVID, so I don't even think we've begun to feel the effects of that. So there could be even more of a logjam coming. And then the stats we heard, I don't know off the top of my head, but it's...
But Bret knows.
Yeah, but a large percentage of manufacturers are saying they want to reshore manufacturing in at least like North America or the Americas. And so any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of talk about globalization, but I've heard the point made, really what you're seeing is an increase in regionalization. And so I think anything of complexity is not made somewhere, it's made many places. And I think that has a big impact on the amount of logistics space you need. So, when you see a car or you see something with sophisticated electronics, you need to carry more inventory closer to where it's being made.
And of including the raw materials, which, because when you talk about reshoring or manufacturing here is great if you have the steel or the paper and whatever else you need.
Yeah, just to pile on there, right? So in theory, every decision that an organization is making is all about risk-adjusted return. Right? Well, if the risk is, again, coming from the kind of the risk industry, the risk is not bearing its head, then you're really focused just on the top part of that equation, which is the return. Mm-hmm. So if you're all focused on return, well, then it comes the whole decision's around price. Well, if you can make things cheaper elsewhere, that means you go make things cheaper elsewhere.
Sure.
And until that risk rears its head and you get punished for that, if you were the guy who was saying, hey, actually, we need to build, more stability, more redundancy into our system, you're losing a bunch of bids because your price structure is not in line with market.
Right.
So I think this concept of this whole risk-adjusted return, where people are starting to underwrite this risk profile differently due to COVID, due to the geopolitical concerns, I think it's an interesting lens by which to view the current environment.
Agreed. And you gave me, I want to keep going on this thread with you, Bret. You gave all of us a new acronym, QDP, quantitatively defensible position. So, I lose all my arguments with my dear wife, Amanda, but now I'm going to start saying I've got a quantifiably defensible position, and we'll see if that helps me out. But thank you for the new acronym. Let's keep talking about implications, rising costs, as we all know, across supply chain. We've touched on many already. But real estate, transportation, labor, inventory carrying costs. What else? Talk a little more. What else do you see in terms of impact now and moving forward?
Well, we were sitting at dinner last night, and literally at the same time, we both go, what a time to, and then I said, be alive, and then he goes, to be in this business. And it is so cool to watch how rapidly things are changing, and to look, just to tie a few of these dots together, right? So you got labor shortages. Well, what does that mean from a supply chain perspective? We're talking to some 3PLs that are saying, actually, we can recruit drivers as long as we can get them in their bed at night. So what does that mean from a distribution perspective? We got to restructure our system so that we can get our facilities 250 miles apart so that we can make that kind of round trip. So just thinking about how some of these pieces kind of, I'll call it like, tie together. And then the other thing that I think will be interesting to watch play out here is, we talked a lot about automation yesterday. Well, that's also an interesting concept because you always have this labor versus capital trade-off, right? Well, now we're seeing the cost of capital starting to rise, and we've seen kind of the rise in labor costs. And if you look at the last, we did some research on this. If you look at the last 3 downturns, so it was like 91, 01 with the dot-com, and then GFC. All of those were followed up by increases in investment automation. Right, because during those times, despite what you kind of think of, hey, supply or demand for labor is down, so your cost of labor should go down consequently. Because of the burden on the unemployment system, your labor costs weren't necessarily changing, but what was the Fed doing to try and spur economic activity? They're lowering rates. So you have that backdrop versus with a component of that being this there is no cyclical component to technology, right? The rest of our economy, we kind of go through ups and downs. Technology's moving up and to the right.
Yeah, Moore's Law, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you see those things play out, and then the last piece you layer onto that is what was the driver, set aside the war in Ukraine, what was the driver for this last downturn? It was a human-borne virus. So the companies who had already, the companies and their suppliers who had really heavily invested in automation, they were the ones who, I don't know if anybody's come out a winner, economically at this point, but it's just, to think through some of those things, and then even to think about what they've been asking since. They're like, oh, well, we just got burnt with our supply chain. We need way better information regarding who are those tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers,
right?
And what are the kind of the operational defense mechanisms they're building into their system. So it's just it's been fascinating to watch these various dynamics play out.
Goes back to your question you were talking about last night. It's an incredible time to fill in the blank, right?
Yeah.
It really is. To be in supply chain, it is a remarkable time, a time that we're going to be studying for generations to come.
No doubt.
You were going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to add on to that and say, when we're talking about great time to be in this business, it's not the real estate business, it is the supply chain and logistics business. That's what everyone's here at this conference for. We're going to the port, and real estate is this component, but like we've been talking about, like these real estate costs are actually becoming like sub 4% or something of the total cost. And the main thing, like everyone was talking about yesterday, that tenants, developers, everyone here is recognizing it's labor and transportation and those things. But, it's like this supply chain is just the backbone of commerce. And when you get into doing these facilities and working with these occupiers and seeing behind the scenes in distribution centers, Amazon facilities, you never look at anything the same way again.
Right.
When you go through a grocery store,
I'd take it a step further. Supply chain is the backbone of humanity. Look at what's going on in Ukraine right now, right? It's all about trying to get massive amounts of artillery in place to change the tide of war. I've seen some of the images of our men and women in the military, load them up and get them over there. It's all supply chain logistics.
Well, and what's the fundamental driver of that? It's information. It's, one of my favorite quotes, I put together a deck recently, every industry is going to become an information industry, and that's why I think it's so exciting to be in the CRE.
Digital supply chain, right? Digitizing operations.
And the one other piece I'll just pile on too, because I think it really ties into the supply chain piece. It's the header on my LinkedIn. The most important or the most dangerous thing in business is finding the right answer to the wrong question. So when people say, "Hey, I need data," it's, well, what are you going to do with that data? What business? What question are you trying to answer with it? And then is that the right question? Nobody has the perfect answer to that, by the way, but it's conferences like this where you have this type of intellectual density where you're able to, you're hearing these phenomenal thought leaders and you're trying to connect the dots. And it's like, wow, so many things in this. I was in a conversation yesterday and a guy was like, obviously it's land market's crazy right now. It's a broker in Indy and he's talking to a guy on the phone. The guy on the phone, never been to Indy. What is he doing? He's using Google Maps to look at land parcels. Guess the last time Google Maps was up there? I don't know, but it was more, several months ago. So like these areas that look like they're like all fields Like that.
It's not reality.
It's not anymore.
Right.
It also doesn't tell you can't turn left there at 5 o'clock unless you drive it at 5 o'clock.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you got the guy. My only point there is I'm the guy over here with the data guy, right? And then you call that broker, and you're like, actually, that makes no sense at all. It's like, all right, good. Glad I didn't spend more time on this.
I'm gonna have to call Bret, get his take on some of my decisions. Like, all right, so Jeremy.
Back to labor. We talk about labor and transportation. So transportation is the biggest cost item, and labor is second. But the reason labor comes up so often is, to me, it's almost binary, right? You can have transportation that's suboptimal, and you don't like it. But if you don't have the labor, you can't execute.
You can't do anything.
You can't do anything. And talk about an interesting time. I mean, it's difficult. In normal times, credit and term is good. Today, credit and term is bad in this capital environment. And, traditionally, a lot of automation has been very capital intensive, very fixed. Some of that's changing. We've talked about that a little bit over the last couple of days. But it's pretty hard to make that kind of investment in a 3 to 5 year lease. And I think that's really interesting. I've also heard from customers, they're using automation to drive more throughput, but there's still a lot of things they can't automate. And so the irony is they need more hands as they drive more throughput as they're automating. And interesting times.
It is.
Yeah, the other piece I'll just pile on there too. In one of our conversations, everybody talks about how, whatever, transportation costs are 50%, whatever, labor's 10, 15, 5, 20, and then your real estate's 2 to 4. Well, okay, we've just had, oil prices have done what they've done, so, what percent of that passes on to your transportation? Roughly, let's just call it 40. So you've got a 20% increase in that, in overall cost just due to the oil or transportation cost. Well, what does that do for the increased criticality of location, right? And thus, how much more are you willing to pay for that 2%? In the real estate to make sure that you're solving for that. As Brewster was talking about yesterday, making sure that you're looking at these things holistically.
Yes.
And it's another example, but I had an office broker call me, or one of our really thought-leading account managers, and he called me I was probably on this job technically in this role 2 days. He goes, hey, I just had a client call me, and they were asking about real estate. They're in D.C. They're asking about real estate prices in Miami. I just thought I should pick your brain on that. I'm like, well, I can tell you without looking that the difference in the labor cost between those two is going to be multiples of what they're paying in real estate in either of those locations. So that's that whole just making sure you're answering the right question.
It's such a great critical point made, Bret. And by the way, if you're in Miami, you got to call Stephen Wasserman, right?
That's right.
Get the call.
The king of Miami.
So really quick, I want to switch over to a really important acronym. We're talking acronyms. ESG, right?
Oh, yeah.
Environmental, societal, governance. We're going to be hearing more and more, and thankfully seeing a lot more action and results and impact in this area across the globe, supply chain and beyond. So, Jeremy, I want to start with you. How will ESG and all the issues that involves continue to impact decision making?
Yeah, I think it's going to have a really big impact. If you look at big corporations, I've noted a couple of things. One, a lot of them have, call it 5-year plans that they're in the middle of and they're way behind. So they're trying to catch up. The actual carbon footprint of our typical space is pretty small. We looked at, for a major home improvement chain, we looked at updating about 6 million square feet of lighting for them. We thought, hey, this will be a really big deal. The reality was it was a half of a percent of their ESG goals. And really it gets down to transportation. That's really what drives it. And the more product you carry closer to the end consumer, the more environmentally friendly it is. And I see that as a big driver in the shaping of the supply chain.
Bret?
Yeah, I'll give a client example because I was kind of trying to think through this and I said, hey, you're going to have to rely on Jeremy for this one. I was like, I got maybe.
Sounds like the sidebar conversation this week have been great.
Yeah. We were pitching a Fortune 100 manufacturer, and so we went in. We're kind of we're doing our prep work right. We're looking at their investor presentations, trying to think about their business, and then how do we bring data to that? Well, we saw diversity was just they were a really early player in kind of this diversity push, and so all right, kind of got a theme. Let's go look at where who and where are they hiring? Where are they struggling to hire? I won't say the towns because one of them will give away who it is. But the 3 towns in which they were hiring were three of the least diverse markets in the entire country. Consequently, the labor pool, as they're kind of going through their own digital transformation, the labor pool that they were hiring the most of, they were taking a very long time to hire. And in the market they were hiring the most of them, or trying to hire the most of them, they were trying to hire more people than work in that market, in that occupation, that don't already work for them. So literally they were chasing an impossible pool. So that's, I think, another, I think this diversity question, more so on the occupier side, maybe some degree on the manufacturing. It's not as big of a topic in transportation, but that's one that I think is becoming. And another one, again, I can just say this piece coming from a super rural town it was a coal mining town. There was a manufacturer 20 minutes away. They left in the 90s for Mexico. There was an appliance manufacturer 40 minutes away. They left in the early 2000s for China. And then you got Caterpillar, has announced it's moving its headquarters out. So one of the things that I guess I've appreciated is I think more clients, we just had this come up with another client we're selling a building for. They said, hey, we want to maximize value. We think to do that, we probably should try and find a user. But this is a company town, and we really there's going to be a lot of people who lose their job if you can't find a user.
Right.
So how do you help us tell the story about kind of the value proposition of this asset to users, which, again, knowing that users care the most about labor. And it was kind of in an impoverished area. So I think this concept of socioeconomic diversity is something that I'm pretty passionate about, just growing up in a very, very rural part of America.
Bret, it's pretty exciting when doing the right thing is also good for business. I mean, think about all the challenges we've talked about with labor over the last couple of days. Well, I mean, if you want to solve a labor problem, one of the things you do is you have the broadest, deepest talent pool.
Yeah.
Sort of limit where and how you look for talent.
Yeah, we call them the 3 C's, and one of my it's kind of like my life mission at this point is to more efficiently connect these, because you've got the companies who are looking for talent. You got the communities who are trying to woo the companies, trying to say either we have the talent here or we'll help build you the talent. And then you've got the 3rd C, the colleges, who in theory should be filling that void between what the companies are looking for and what the communities have. And then I'll call it the 4th C is almost like, I'll just say college student just because it goes better, but the student, and how do you equip them with I had no idea what I was doing when I was going to make a college decision, an occupational decision. Well, there's a lot of data out there now to say, hey, what are you good at? Like the overlap of what are you good at, what do you enjoy doing, and what will the market reward you to do? And so I think as information becomes a bigger component of that process, being able, we've done some work with some communities to say, hey, how do we need to position ourselves? Everybody loves manufacturing. The reason they love manufacturing is that has the greatest like economic multiple. Right. So like one manufacturing job creates more kind of other jobs around it. So we're doing a study for a large municipality and talking to them about the labor pools they have and how they align with where the market is, where that skill gap is, and then plugging in that community partner to help fill that void. And I think there's, we heard, I think we're in a very volatile time. It's a very, there's a lot of, call it scary things happening in the world. And you can either be like scared or you see it kind of as opportunity. And I mean, like there's a reason that America, is where it is. And a lot of people went through a lot tougher times than we're going through right now to get us to where we are. So I'm excited about the future.
Excellent point. I love how you're helping communities go after the right goals, right? If they're playing with ABC, go after the goals of those factors, kind of make it more realistic.
Client at the center, right? I mean,
yes. Really quick, I want to get your take on some of what you're hearing here as we're coming down. But before I do, I want to shed, the Wall Street Journal had a great story a week or so ago about a French shoe company that was bound and determined to bring the operations and manufacturing back to France. But the supply base for the labor, the specialized supply base, hadn't been in France for like 2 decades. So what their team had to do, because they were committed, is they had to rework the design of the shoes. And they took out 2/3 of all the different components just for it to make sense to have their manufacturing back in France. I think the decisions behind a lot of that are kind of lost in the headline aspect of nearshoring and reshoring. And I think some folks that may not be plugged into that may lose sight of some of the real decisions and factors that play into the viability of doing some of the reshoring and nearshoring. But with that said, do you have French shoes on, by the way?
These are actually American-made boots, and Jocko Willink, the retired U.S. Navy SEAL, it's his company.
Really?
Yeah, and of course, like I know he manufactures them, but I can't remember what they're called.
Very cool.
I'm not too much of a fashionista, but we'll put it on the podcast notes. And they're American-made, manufactured in the USA boots. So I was just going to comment on the buildings, though. I mean, I think it is, we're building 70 million square feet in Dallas right now, so it's ridiculous. So, I mean, when there's that much square footage, developers need to be thinking about sustainability. And cross-laminate timber is being put up on one building in Dallas, one out of all of those buildings, but that's a way to reduce emissions. Mega slab is this new foundation that's out there. It's jointless concrete. That reduces emissions. That also, I've heard from some highly automated tenants that they prefer the jointless slab to a slab with joints.
See everybody taking notes out here. You're dropping some.
Putting like extra steel into the roof joist to support solar panels in the future. Like in a place like Texas, that's not required like it is in a place like California, but I think soon it will be. And then, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. Putting EV charging conduits underground so that it's underneath the truck court and ready to go. You don't have to go get it ready and install the EV stations right now if you don't need them. But like these, I think it's important to start looking because we're building so much of these buildings and it seems like the demand's continuing to go on. So I know our occupier clients are looking to do it, and then a lot of forward-thinking developers are doing it as well.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah, Ward, to that point, I mean, I mentioned earlier the carbon footprint of the traditional warehouse is not very big. I mean, traditional warehouse wasn't AC'd, right? And you had 3 or 4 forklifts, moving around, but just not a lot of energy consumption. When you start adding things like EV charging and automation and air conditioning, the power requirements go way up. And sort of how you source that power becomes really important.
Yeah, that's such a good point.
Excellent point. If I can, a little Pollyanna moment maybe, but something I think is really important to me. We talk about all the charge that business leaders have when it comes to ESG, but the power of the consumer. Supply, as my buddy Scott Case at NRF said one time, supply chains do what they're programmed to do, right?
Yeah.
They do what the consumers want. We have the power as consumers, and all of y'all are real estate industry pros, but as consumers, which all of us are, do we really need that pair of socks from Amazon the next day that comes in a big box? And,
or 5 pairs of different shoes and send them back. Like reverse supply chain's a whole nother, reverse
that's
logistics.
The next podcast.
Yes. Well, and it's the reverse space is unfortunately is undercovered in industry. Big shout out to Tony Schroeder and our friends at RLA. Okay, we got to come down the home stretch. It's fascinating stuff. By the way, I think if we hooked up Bret to a power grid, we could power half of the country. Really, I love your passion. I'm not.
Imagine how many French shoes we can make with Bret's power.
But it's palatable. It is palatable, and we need more passionate folks in the industry that do what all 3 of you are talking about. You bring, it's not business as usual. It's not Ward coming in just by himself to talk a deal and see what they need. Bring a truck driver, bring a data scientist, bring a bevy of experts to really understand what the customers are after and what their needs are and bring them the best solution. That is a universal lesson learned, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so 9:46, we're ahead of schedule. Man,
That's
y'all are
great.
real pros.
Yeah.
Let's do this, because I want to make sure folks know how to connect with you, and then maybe we'll give everybody a final thought here. So let's start with Bret. Bret, fascinating. And then you still live in Chicago, is that right?
So it's complicated.
He's a digital nomad over here.
So I lived in most of my 20s in Chicago, and then did the whole COVID migration thing down to Tampa. My buddy and I did our own little site selection, and then now given how much I travel, I'm homeless. So I just,
Well,
when are you coming to Dallas? Because then you can be Dallas sites with Jeremy and I for at least
a week and a
2 minutes.
half. Yeah, week and a half.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay.
So sports-wise, Chicago, who's your allegiance? Where's that?
So where I grew, again, growing up kind of in the middle of nowhere, the advantage of that is you get to pick any team you want.
Okay.
So I had 49ers fans, Steelers fans, Cowboys. All my buddies were different teams. But Green Bay won the Super Bowl when I was 6. Quarterback had the same first name as me.
Yeah.
Pretty easy decision. And then I needed a college team, and I was like, well, wait, this team has the same they actually have cooler colors in the same logo.
Right.
So I'm like randomly a Georgia fan as well. So.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Well, really have enjoyed. I loved our prep call, folks. We had a prep call a couple weeks ago, and Ward and I kind of sat back along with Mie, and we Bret and Jeremy went to town. We should have recorded that and released that. It would have been one of the greatest hits. So we'll have to have y'all back. But Bret, how can folks connect with you after the conference?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. It's Bret with one T. So my parents were pretty ESG, like friendly back in the 90s. So they cut a T off there. So it's Bret.Swango at Colliers.com. Or,
just that easy.
Last name is spelled Swango.
Wonderful. Wonderful. All right, so Jeremy, same question.
Yeah.
Congrats. I think your 1-year anniversary.
Coming up in June.
Coming up in June. That's a badge of honor as a fellow
it's amazing,
entrepreneur.
man.
Hope to come to our 1-year birthday party.
Let's do it. Can I be an honorary Dallas site?
Absolutely.
I didn't even know that was a term.
I also didn't know that was a term. But
Yeah, that's a term.
If Ward says it.
that's where I was at. That's where I was at.
So, Jeremy, how can folks connect with you in Constellation?
Yeah, one way is Jeremy at constellationrep.com. Similar to Bret, I'm on LinkedIn. Either of those work really well.
Awesome. Well, congrats again. Both of y'all, man, I'll make one heck of a 1-2 punch. I mean, really have enjoyed, learned a lot. I feel like I've gotten a certification this last hour. All right, Ward, I have enjoyed our collaboration going back three and a half years, whatever it's been.
Yeah.
We met first at a Reuters event in Atlanta as you were out and about. Have enjoyed learning a lot more about the industrial real estate market ever since. But how can folks connect with the illustrious Ward Richmond?
The best way probably is LinkedIn as well. And then I have a website, supplychainrealestate.com. That's a personal blog. And I'll post this episode up there and put up all the podcasts and market updates and whatnot on supplychainrealestate.com.
Love it. And quick shout out to Christina, former member of your team, who is here. We interviewed her.
K-Rod.
That's right, K-Rod.
Yeah, there she is. She's out there paying attention right now.
All right. So, Ward, I want to give you, we've heard, Jeremy and Bret, man, knocked it out of the park today, right? An hour doesn't do it justice for these gentlemen. What is one key takeaway from what you heard today? Just one key takeaway from what we talked about here today that listeners should have front and center.
I just think it's about a holistic approach to all of these different methods of problem solving, and it's taking old school, new school, data analytics, and boots on the ground, and looking at everything, maybe from sustainability to transportation to labor to the actual facility, and you got to take everything into consideration. You can't be short-sighted right now. It's got to be a holistic approach.
Excellent point. And truck drivers came up a couple times in our conversation. God bless them. They have kept the industry moving. We had a chance to sit down and interview 2 Southeastern freight drivers, and to hear in their perspective what they experience each day that isn't a blind spot for all of us here. Folks, if you get an opportunity to sit down with a truck driver, do it. Do it.
I was actually going to say, I don't know if that's an ESG type deal, but there is a massive shortage of truck parking in the United States, and that's something that communities need to pay attention to. Communities don't want to have truck parking zone because it's not pretty and it doesn't make a lot of money, but these truckers are stuck out on the sides of roads sleeping at night or sleeping in vacant parking lots somewhere, and oftentimes getting robbed or being in unsafe environments. And
got to change that.
That's got to change.
Yeah. They can spend, according to data released by our friends in Atlanta, truck drivers can spend a couple hours a day just trying to find some place to park, 2 hours a day. And of course, you got hours of service, you got other regulations that factor into your average day. So completely agree with you. And one last thing, as consumers, there was a great quote in a newspaper article I read here lately. Focus on e-commerce, and the analyst said, as consumers, we all want that next day or same day delivery, as long as it's fulfilled by a city across town or other side of the state. To your point about no one wants to, it kind of comes with it. We got to lean into it.
There's an industrial zoned land right now in Dallas that it's getting, there's fights from the community to not put industrial on it.
And we're going to see more of it. California, Pennsylvania, Texas, a lot of places. Okay, So with that, thank you for that final word. Thank you all, Jeremy.
A lot of final words.
Well, there's so much to talk about. And, of course, you've got 3 pros, a lot of passion, a lot of expertise. I hate that I missed all these the earlier days. It sounds like there's a lot of good stuff covered. So, Ward, on behalf of our friends at Colliers, big thanks again. May appreciate all of your wonderful facilitation, you and your comrades. Big thanks to Bret Swango with Colliers. Big thanks to Jeremy Giles. We talked about that pre-show because I asked about Brian Giles and Marcus Giles.
Yeah.
Jeremy Giles with
My more athletic cousins.
Constellation Real Estate Partners, and of course Ward Richmond, Executive Vice President with Colliers International. Scott Luton. Ward, we got to challenge folks: do good, give forward, and be the change. And I think that's a wrap here from the 2022 Supply Chain Conference, hosted by our friends at Colliers Logistics and Transportation Solutions Group. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for being a part of our Supply Chain Now community. Check out all of our programming at supplychainnow.com and make sure you subscribe to Supply Chain Now anywhere you listen to podcasts. And follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. See you next time on Supply Chain Now.